The wind moved through the empty valley like a wounded animal. It carried the smell of ash and burnt metal, the last remains of what had once been a land of life. The sky above was a dull orange, choked by smoke that never cleared. Every breath tasted like dust. Once dragons had flown here. They had ruled the skies with grace and fire. But that was before the Galactic Syndicate came. Now all that was left were ruins, silence, and the shadows of what used to be. Lyra, a small dragon girl with scales the color of soft gold, lay beside her mother in a cracked cave. Her wings were not yet strong enough for flight. Her eyes, bright and curious, looked out toward the ruined valley. Her mother, Sereth, was large and powerful even in her weakness, though a long wound ran down her side. The wound burned with a faint blue light, where plasma fire had touched her. Every breath she took was slow and painful. "Mama," Lyra whispered, her small claws clutching her mother's talon. "When will it stop hurting?" Sereth opened her eyes. They glowed faintly in the dim light. "Soon, little flame," she said softly. "We must rest." Her voice trembled as she tried to sound strong. The truth was that she did not know if the pain would ever stop. The Syndicate had hunted them for weeks. Her mate had fallen in battle, and she had flown as far as she could with Lyra on her back before her body failed her. The child's stomach rumbled. There had been no food in days. The animals had long since fled or died. The air was too thick for even the smallest birds to fly. Sereth looked at her daughter and felt a deep ache in her heart. Dragons were once proud. They had never begged, never hidden. But now she lay in the dirt, hiding from metal hunters and starving in silence. Lyra crawled to the mouth of the cave and peered outside. The world looked broken. The blackened ground stretched for miles. The rivers were dry, their beds full of ash. In the distance, she saw something strange. A glint of silver and a faint flicker of blue light. Something was moving among the wreckage of old ships. "Mama," she whispered again, her voice full of wonder. "There's someone out there." Sereth lifted her head slightly, her golden eyes narrowing. She could smell oil and metal. Not Syndicate machines, something smaller, weaker. Human. Her heart filled with fear. "Stay away from the entrance, Lyra," she warned sharply. "Humans are dangerous." But Lyra did not move. Her gaze stayed on the figure below. It was a man, dressed in a torn flight suit, his face hidden beneath a helmet. He was bent over a small ship half buried in the dirt. Sparks flew from his hands as he worked on the engine. A small flame flickered beside him, bright against the darkness. He looked alone, lost. "He doesn't look dangerous," Lyra said softly. Sereth hissed. "That is how they look. Kind faces, soft words, and then they burn everything." Her voice cracked, heavy with memory. "Your father trusted a human once. He died for it." Lyra turned to look at her mother. "But maybe not all humans are the same," she said. Her small voice trembled with hope. "Maybe this one will help us." Sereth closed her eyes. She wanted to believe it, but she had seen too much. Humans had come with promises of peace before. They had built trade stations, shared technology, and then, when the Syndicate rose, those same humans turned their weapons on dragons. The fire that had once belonged to her kind now came from human ships. "No one will help us, Lyra," Sereth said quietly. "We are the last. The galaxy has forgotten us." Lyra stayed silent for a moment. Then she looked back at the man below. He had taken off his helmet. His face was pale and tired, covered in dirt and sweat. He was talking to himself as he worked, his voice too soft for her to hear. Every now and then he stopped and looked up at the sky, as if waiting for someone who would never come. Something about him made her chest feel strange. He looked lonely, just like them. As night fell, the wind grew colder. The little flame from the man's camp flickered against the dark. Lyra watched him for a long time, her eyes heavy with sleep. She thought about what her mother had said. Humans were dangerous, but so was hunger, so was being alone. She curled up beside her mother again, pressing close to the warmth of her scales. "Mama," she whispered, her voice soft and full of hope. "Maybe that human will help us." Sereth did not answer. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. But her claws curled slightly around her daughter's small body, pulling her closer. Outside, the human worked late into the night, unaware of the eyes watching him from the darkness above. The valley was quiet except for the crackle of fire and the hum of broken machines. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled over the mountains, carrying the promise of a storm. And for the first time in many days, Lyra fell asleep dreaming not of fear, but of hope. Ethan Cole sat beside the broken hull of his ship, wiping sweat from his face with a dirty cloth. The sun on Varela was harsh, and its light burned through the smoke-filled air like fire. He had been stranded for 3 days now. His shuttle, the Nomad's Grace, lay half-buried in the gray dust of the valley. The left engine was shattered, the hull cracked open, and the main reactor was useless. He had enough rations for maybe 2 weeks if he stretched them. But what truly worried him was the silence. The kind of silence that made a man feel small. He pulled out a small data pad from his belt and checked the ship's diagnostics again. Every red warning light blinked like a heartbeat of failure. He sighed, muttering to himself. "You really did it this time, Ethan." His voice sounded strange against the quiet. He was used to noise. Machines humming, voices calling, engines roaring. Here, only the wind answered him. He stood up and looked around. The land stretched endlessly, covered in ash and ruin. Once he had read about Varela in the archives, a world of dragons, of legend and beauty. But now it looked like every other dead planet the Syndicate had touched. He kicked a piece of metal aside. "Another world burned," he said softly. He tried to focus on the task. The only way off this planet was to fix the Grace. He opened a panel and began sorting through a mess of wires. His fingers worked quickly, steady despite the tremors in his arms. Years of working with machines had given him patience. Machines, unlike people, didn't lie. They broke, but you could fix them. He liked that about them. As he worked, a memory flashed in his mind. His old commander shouting orders, the sound of explosions in orbit, and the look of fear on alien faces. He pushed the thought away. He didn't want to remember the war. Not now. Not after everything he had done to escape it. By the time the sun began to set, Ethan had managed to power up part of the ship's internal systems. The lights flickered weakly, casting shadows inside the cockpit. He sat in the pilot's chair and stared out at the valley. There was movement in the distance. Something small, glinting gold in the fading light. He squinted, but it was gone before he could focus. Probably just a reflection, he told himself. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small metal locket. It was old and scratched. Inside was a picture of a woman and a little boy. He looked at it for a long time before closing it again. "I'll make it home," he whispered. "I promise." That night he built a small fire near the wreckage. The orange light flickered against the dark walls of the valley. He heated a pack of dried food and sat quietly, staring into the flames. The silence pressed down again. Only the soft crackle of burning wood and the distant howl of wind kept him company. After a while he heard something. It was faint, like a sob carried by the wind. He frowned and looked up. "Hello?" he called out. No answer. He listened again. The sound came once more, softer this time. It sounded like a child crying. He stood slowly, hand reaching for the plasma torch at his side. The firelight cast long shadows as he turned in a slow circle, searching the dark. Nothing moved, just the shifting air and the whisper of dust. "Must be the wind," he muttered. But something inside him didn't believe that. He grabbed a flashlight from his pack and began to walk toward the sound. The beam of light cut through the dark, bouncing off rocks and broken metal. The sobs grew a little clearer now. Definitely not the wind. They came from the direction of a cave halfway up the hill. Ethan hesitated. He had seen what kinds of things lived on dead worlds. But he couldn't just ignore it. "Probably just a scared kid," he said, trying to convince himself. Or something worse. Either way, he couldn't leave it alone. The climb up the hill was slow. The ground was loose, and the air thin. He moved quietly, his boots crunching on ash and stone. When he reached the cave entrance, he stopped. His flashlight beam caught movement, a small figure, crouched beside something large. He lowered his torch, his other hand ready near his belt. "Hey!" he called softly. "You okay?" There was no answer. The small figure froze, then turned. For a heartbeat, Ethan couldn't move. Two glowing golden eyes stared back at him from the darkness. A voice, soft and trembling, spoke. "Please? Can you help Mama?" Ethan's grip on the torch loosened. The light revealed them fully now. A small dragon, no bigger than a child, standing protectively beside a much larger one lying on the ground. The older dragon's side was burned and bleeding, smoke still rising from the wound. He took a step back, his heart pounding. Dragons. Real dragons. Every soldier had heard the stories, creatures of fire and destruction. But the little one looked terrified, not dangerous. Her scales shimmered like gold in the beam of his light. He swallowed hard and slowly knelt down, setting his tools aside. "Easy," he said quietly. "I'm not going to hurt you." The little dragon looked at him, her eyes wide and full of hope. "Can you help Mama?" she whispered again. Ethan looked at the wound. He knew plasma burns when he saw them. He also knew they didn't heal on their own. He hesitated only a moment before pulling his medkit from his belt. "I'll try," he said softly. The child blinked, confused. "You're a human." He gave a tired smile. "Yeah, guess that's still true." He moved closer, ignoring the low growl from the mother. "It's okay," he said gently. "I'm a mechanic, not a soldier anymore." He tore open a pack of medgel and began to treat the wound, careful not to cause more pain. The dragon flinched at first, but then relaxed slightly as the cool gel soothed her burns. When he finished, he sat back and sighed. "That should help for now." The little dragon's eyes were bright with wonder. "Thank you." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, then at the wounded mother. "Don't thank me yet," he said quietly. "We're not safe here." And somewhere deep inside, he realized he wasn't just fixing a broken ship anymore. He might be fixing something far greater. Ethan sat quietly beside the cave entrance, his breathing slow and careful. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and metal. He could still feel the weight of what he had just seen. Dragons. Real, living dragons. For years, humans had believed they were wiped out, hunted to extinction after the Syndicate burned their worlds. Yet here they were, a mother and her child hiding in the ashes. The mother dragon, Sereth, had not taken her eyes off him. Her golden pupils followed his every move, full of suspicion. The smaller one, Lyra, stood close to her. But there was something different in her gaze. She wasn't afraid, only curious. Ethan slowly set down his medkit. "I patched her up the best I could," he said in a low voice. "But she needs rest. And water. Maybe food, if I can find some." Sereth growled softly, her voice deep and rough. "Why would a human help us? Your kind did this." Her tail flicked against the stone, stirring dust into the air. Ethan didn't look up right away. He kept his eyes on the ground. "You're right," he said finally. "Humans did this. Or at least the kind that followed the Syndicate." He sighed and rubbed his face with a tired hand. "I left that behind. I don't fight for them anymore." Lyra tilted her head. "You left?" she asked softly. "Why?" He met her eyes. They reminded him of sunlight on gold. Innocent, bright, untouched by war. "Because I got tired of fixing ships that destroyed worlds," he said. "I fixed things to keep them flying, not to kill." Seretha's growl softened, but her body remained tense. "Words are easy. Humans have spoken them before." Ethan nodded. "You're right again. I don't expect you to trust me, but your wound will get worse without care." He pointed toward her side, where the medgel still shimmered faintly. "I'll bring more when I can." Lyra stepped closer to him, her small claws clicking on the rock. "You're not afraid of us," she said, almost surprised. He smiled faintly. "I've been afraid of worse things." He thought of the Syndicate ships, their burning skies, the sound of cities dying. Besides, he added softly, you don't seem so scary to me. Sereth lowered her head slightly, her eyes narrowing. You speak like someone who has seen too much. Ethan gave a tired laugh. Maybe. Or maybe just enough. He stood and dusted off his hands. I'll find you some water. There's a cracked cistern about half a mile east. Might still hold some. Lyra's eyes widened. You're coming back? He nodded. Yeah. I don't walk away from something broken. Not if I can fix it. He glanced at the wounded dragon again. And your mother's tough. But she's not going to heal without help. For a moment, Sereth said nothing. Then she lowered her head slightly in a gesture that was not quite trust, but not hostility either. Go then, she said. If you are lying, you will not return. Ethan gave a faint smile. Fair enough. He walked out into the dying light, his boots crunching on the ash. The wind picked up again, carrying a low moan through the valley. As he moved, he thought about what he had just promised. Helping them was dangerous. If the syndicate found out he had aided dragons, they'd execute him on sight. But leaving them here felt worse. He couldn't explain it, but something about the little one's voice, the hope in it, had reached a part of him he thought was long gone. Back in the cave, Lyra turned to her mother. He's kind, she said softly. Sereth stared at the cave mouth, where the human's shadow had disappeared into the dusk. Humans can be kind, she said slowly, before they change. She lowered her head to rest again, though her gaze stayed on the valley. But maybe this one is different. Lyra smiled faintly and curled up beside her. I think he is. Outside, Ethan followed the faint trail of broken ground until he reached a cracked stone basin. Inside, a thin layer of rainwater shimmered under the stars. He filled his canister and looked up at the dark sky. The stars here seemed distant, dim behind the smoke. He wondered how many of them still had life, or if the syndicate had burned them all. When he returned, the moon had risen high. The dragons were awake, their eyes glowing in the dim light. He set the canister down carefully. Here, he said quietly. It's not much, but it's clean. Lyra sniffed it first, then looked up at him. Thank you, human. He smiled faintly. Ethan, he corrected. My name's Ethan. She tried to repeat it. Ethan. Her tongue stumbled over the sound. He chuckled. Close enough. Sereth took a slow drink, her breathing easier now. She watched him for a long time, her eyes thoughtful. Ethan Cole, she said softly, as if testing the name. If your words are true, you are a fool. He smiled. Probably. But even as he said it, he knew he wouldn't stop. Somewhere deep inside, something old was stirring again. Something that felt like hope. The next few days passed slowly in the valley. The gray sun rose and fell behind the smoke, and the air stayed heavy with the smell of ash. Ethan worked from sunrise until the light faded, fixing what he could on his damaged ship. Every few hours, he would climb the rocky path to the cave, bringing what little food and water he could find for the dragons. He didn't know why he kept coming back. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was something deeper. Something that made him want to see the little dragon smile again. Lyra always met him first. The moment she heard his footsteps, she would peek from the cave entrance, her eyes bright and hopeful. You came back, she would say each time, as if she couldn't quite believe it. Ethan always smiled and nodded. Told you I would. Sereth still watched him with wary eyes. She didn't speak much, but her anger seemed to fade little by little. Ethan never pushed too hard. He spoke softly, moved slowly, and kept his tools where she could see them. He treated her wounds again using the last of his medgel. The burns had begun to heal, though scars of dark silver remained along her side. One evening, the valley grew colder than usual. A soft rain began to fall, turning the ash into thin mud. Ethan built a small fire near the cave's mouth, its orange light reflecting on the wet stone. Lyra sat close to the flames, fascinated by the way they danced. Sereth stayed behind her, her large body curled around the cave wall, her golden eyes half closed. Ethan sat across from them, hands extended toward the warmth. The silence between them was comfortable for the first time. Only the sound of rain and crackling fire filled the air. Lyra tilted her head. "You make fire without breath," she said softly. "How?" Ethan smiled. "It's not real fire, not like yours. Just fuel and spark." He flicked his lighter, showing her the small blue flame. Lyra's eyes widened. "That's tiny." He laughed quietly. "Yeah, well, it's enough to keep me warm." Sereth opened one eye. "Humans play with weak fire," she said with a low hum. "And yet they burned the stars." Ethan's smile faded. He looked into the flames for a moment before answering. "Not all of us wanted that. Some of us just wanted to live, to build, to make things better." He turned the lighter in his hand. But the syndicate changed everything. They took what was good and turned it into a weapon. Sereth's gaze softened, just slightly. "And you ran from them." "I did," he said. "I was a mechanic on their ships. I fixed their engines, their weapons. When I saw what they were doing to people, to planets, I couldn't do it anymore. So I stole what I could and left." Lyra leaned closer. "So you're a bad human to the bad humans?" Ethan laughed softly. "Something like that." For the first time, Sereth's lips curved in what might have been the shadow of a smile. "Strange. A human who runs from war." He shrugged. "Someone has to fix what's left behind." They sat quietly again. The rain fell harder now, but the fire kept them warm. Lyra's eyes shone in the flickering light. "Tell me about your home," she said suddenly. "Is it like this?" Ethan looked out at the valley. "No," he said softly. Earth was blue and green, full of life. Oceans, forests, cities that touched the clouds. But that was a long time ago. Now it's under syndicate rule like everything else. Lyra frowned. "You miss it." He nodded. "Every day." Sereth watched him closely. "Why help us, then? You could fix your ship and leave." He looked at her, then at Lyra. "Because leaving someone behind when you can help them. That's not who I want to be anymore." For a while, no one spoke. The only sound was the fire. Then, quietly, Sereth said, "Long ago, humans and dragons shared trade and knowledge. They flew beside us. We thought them strong." She looked down. "Then they burned us. Now you bring us water." Ethan met her eyes. "Maybe that's how we start again." The words hung in the air. Sereth didn't reply, but her tail moved closer to the fire, and she no longer turned away from him. Lyra smiled and looked between them. "Maybe you're not all bad," she said cheerfully. Ethan chuckled. "I'll take that as a compliment." As the night grew deeper, Lyra dozed off beside her mother. Sereth lay still, her great wings folded around the little one. Ethan sat quietly, watching the fire die down. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a soldier or a fugitive. He just felt human. Before sleep took him, Sereth's voice came softly from the dark. "If you mean what you say, human, then perhaps the stars have not forgotten us after all." Ethan looked toward her, but she had already closed her eyes. He smiled faintly, leaning back against the cave wall. Outside, the rain eased, and the clouds began to thin. Through a small gap in the smoke, a few stars shone down dim, but still burning. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan believed they might still be worth saving. The valley was quiet that morning, too quiet. A strange calm hung in the air, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Ethan was outside, sorting through pieces of metal and wires scattered near his ship. He had almost managed to rebuild one of the engines. It wasn't ready to fly, but if luck stayed with him, he could power it enough to move. He wiped his hands on his jacket and looked up at the gray sky. The smoke that usually covered it seemed thinner today, and for a brief moment, sunlight broke through. He smiled a little. Felt good to see light again. Then he heard it, a distant hum. Soft at first, then louder. His smile vanished. He knew that sound. Syndicate patrol drones. Ethan dropped his tools and ran up the hill toward the cave. Lyra was outside chasing a small ash moth, her wings fluttering as she tried to catch it. She turned when she saw him running toward her. "Ethan?" she asked. "What's wrong?" He grabbed her gently and pointed to the sky. Inside now. Sereth came out at once, sensing his fear. What is it? He didn't have to answer. The hum grew into a deep mechanical roar. 3 dark shapes broke through the clouds. Sleek Syndicate patrol ships, their engines glowing blue. They moved in a slow formation, scanning the valley below. Ethan cursed under his breath. They must have picked up my distress signal, he said quickly. Or maybe the explosion when I crashed. Sereth's eyes widened. They will see us. Not if we hide, Ethan said, scanning the area. His mind raced. The ships had thermal scanners. Hiding in a cave wouldn't be enough. You need to go deeper into the mountain, he said firmly. There's a gap at the back of the cave that leads into the tunnels. Stay there and keep quiet. Lyra clung to his arm. What about you? Ethan hesitated. I'll draw them away. Sereth growled. That is foolish. You are only one man. He nodded. Yeah, but one man with a broken ship that still has some tricks left in it. He turned toward the wreck. If I can power it up, I can make it look like I'm trying to escape. They'll follow me instead of scanning this area. Lyra's eyes filled with tears. No, you'll die. Ethan knelt in front of her. Hey, he said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. You remember what I said? Mechanics fix things. That's what I do. This valley's broken and I can't fix all of it, but maybe I can buy you time. Sereth stepped closer, her tail curling protectively around her daughter. You owe us nothing, human. I know, he said, but I can't walk away. Before either of them could argue, he ran back down the hill. He could already see the patrols spreading out. The Syndicate ships were dropping drones, black spheres that drifted through the air like metal ghosts, scanning everything they touched. Ethan threw himself into the pilot's chair of the Nomad's Grace and began flipping switches. Sparks burst from the broken console, but the old machine hummed weakly to life. Come on, girl, he muttered. Just one more run. The reactor coughed, sputtered, then roared. The ship shook, dust falling from the ceiling. The screens flickered with warning symbols, but the engines responded. He grabbed the flight controls and pushed the throttle forward. The ship groaned and lurched out of the ground, struggling to lift off. Outside, the Syndicate ships immediately changed course. Unauthorized human vessel detected. One of the drones announced in a cold, mechanical voice. Engage and destroy. Ethan laughed under his breath. That's right. Come and get me. He took off low, skimming over the valley floor. The ship shook violently, alarms blaring. He kept his eyes forward, teeth clenched. The Syndicate patrols followed, firing bursts of blue plasma that scorched the ground behind him. In the cave, Lyra and Sereth watched the sky glow with explosions. Lyra's claws dug into the rock. He's not coming back, is he? She whispered. Sereth's wings twitched, her body tense. Do not say that. But her voice trembled. Ethan pushed the Nomad's Grace to its limit. He flew toward the far canyon, where the cliffs rose high enough to hide a ship. The Syndicate was close now. He opened a small panel on his console and pulled a set of makeshift switches he had wired the night before. You wanted a show, he muttered. You got one. He slammed his fist on the trigger. The rear of his ship exploded in a massive blast of white light. The shockwave ripped through the air, blinding the Syndicate sensors. 2 of the patrol drones were caught in the fire, spinning out of control before crashing into the cliffs. The others scattered, their systems overloaded. The explosion threw Ethan's ship into a spiral. The world spun, the controls dead in his hands. He hit the emergency eject lever just before the Nomad's Grace slammed into the ground and vanished in a wave of flame. Sereth saw the fireball rise in the distance. She closed her eyes and lowered her head. Lyra screamed, tears falling down her scaled cheeks. Ethan! The sound echoed through the valley. Sereth pulled her daughter close, wrapping her wings around her trembling body. Hush, little one, she said softly, her own voice breaking. He did what he could. The smoke from the wreck rose into the sky, glowing orange against the dark clouds. The Syndicate ships circled the area for a while, then turned away, vanishing beyond the horizon. The valley was silent again. Lyra sat beside her mother, staring at the burning wreckage far away. "He said he would come back," she whispered. Sereth looked at the fire for a long time. "Humans," she said quietly. "Strange creatures. Fragile, foolish, yet brave." She pressed her nose gently against Lyra's head. "Perhaps the stars will remember this one." Far in the distance, under the smoke and flame, a figure crawled from the wreckage, coughing, burned, but alive. The morning after the explosion came with cold wind and gray skies. Smoke still hung over the valley, drifting in slow curls from the wreck of the Nomad's Grace. The fire had burned through most of the night, painting the rocks orange and gold. Now only the faint smell of metal and ash remained. Sereth stood on the ridge above the crash site, her wings folded close against the wind. She had left Lyra asleep deep in the cave, wrapped in the last bits of warmth the night had given them. Her golden eyes searched the wreckage below. Nothing moved, no sound, just silence and ruin. She exhaled softly, a sound like a sigh of smoke. "Foolish human," she murmured. "You should have flown away." Still, something inside her, a small, stubborn spark, refused to leave. She began to climb down toward the wreck. Ash and twisted metal covered the ground. The once sleek ship was now only a blackened skeleton. Sereth stepped carefully between broken panels, her claws scraping the stone. She paused when she heard a faint sound. It was not wind. It was a cough. Her head snapped toward the noise. Beneath a bent wing plate something moved. She pushed it aside with her claw, and there he was, Ethan. Burned, bruised, but alive. His face was covered in soot, and one arm hung limply, but his eyes were open. "Guess," he rasped weakly. "I didn't fix it all." Sereth stared for a moment, almost not believing. Then she reached down carefully, her large claw sliding beneath his body. "You live," she said quietly. He tried to smile, but it came out more as a grimace. "Not sure for how long." "Long enough," Sereth said. She lifted him and began the slow climb back toward the cave. He drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling something about engines and circuits. She didn't understand his words, but she listened anyway. When she finally reached the cave, Lyra was already awake. Her eyes widened when she saw Ethan in her mother's arms. "He's alive!" she cried, running forward. "Mama, he's alive!" Sereth nodded and laid Ethan gently near the fire pit. "Barely." Lyra knelt beside him, her small claws trembling. "He came back," she whispered. Ethan opened one eye and looked at her. "Told you I would," he said faintly. Lyra smiled through tears. "You're hurt." "I've been worse," he said, though his breathing was shallow. Sereth tore a strip of her wing membrane, a painful gesture of respect among dragons, and wrapped it around his burned arm. Ethan blinked at her in surprise. "You didn't have to." "Be silent," she said. "You saved us. Now we save you." He closed his eyes. Fair trade. For the rest of the day, Sereth tended to him while Lyra fetched water and wood. They kept the fire going and gave him small sips of melted snow. He slept most of the time, feverish and murmuring. Sometimes he called out names they didn't know. People from another life, perhaps. Lyra stayed close, whispering to him even when he couldn't hear. When night fell again, Ethan's fever broke. He stirred, opening his eyes to see the cave lit by warm firelight. Lyra was asleep beside him, her tail curled around his leg. Sereth sat nearby, her eyes glowing softly in the dark. "You should have left," she said quietly. He turned his head toward her. "And let them find you? We would have hidden." He shook his head slowly. "Not for long. They always find what they're looking for." Sereth looked at the fire, then at him. "Why fight for us? Your kind took our skies long ago." Ethan was silent for a moment. "Maybe that's why," he said finally. "Maybe I just wanted to do one thing right." Sereth studied him for a long while. Then she said, "You did." The wind outside howled, but the cave was warm. Ethan closed his eyes again, this time not from pain but peace. Lyra stirred beside him, murmuring softly in her sleep. For the first time since the crash, Sereth allowed herself to relax. The human had earned his place, at least for now. The next morning, the smoke was gone. The valley was still scarred, but the air was clear enough to see the distant mountains. Birds, small, gray shapes, flew across the open sky. Ethan sat up slowly, wincing. "Guess I'm not dead yet," he muttered. Lyra giggled. "Mama said dragons heal fast. Maybe humans do too." He chuckled softly. "Not like you, but I'll manage." Sereth stood near the cave's entrance, looking toward the horizon. "The syndicate will return," she said. "They always do." Ethan nodded. "Then we'll be ready." "We?" she asked, turning her gaze toward him. He met her eyes. "If you'll have me." For a long moment Sereth said nothing. Then, with a slow nod, she replied, "Then we fight together." Lyra grinned, her eyes bright. "Together," she repeated. The word echoed softly in the cave, a small promise born in the ashes. Outside, the wind carried away the last of the smoke. The valley was scarred, but not silent anymore. It had life again, and among the ruins of fire and war, a fragile bond had been forged between dragon and man, between past and what might come next. The sun rose pale over the scorched valley, its weak light glinting on the blackened rocks and ash-covered ground. Ethan moved carefully, his body still stiff from injuries, but his mind was alert. The valley had grown quiet again, but the silence was uneasy. He knew the syndicate would return, and next time they would come with more than just patrol drones. Sereth and Lyra were already awake, waiting for him near the cave entrance. The little dragon's eyes shone with determination, her small wings twitching as she prepared for the day. Sereth's golden gaze was steady, watching the distant horizon. There was tension in her body, but it was tempered with a quiet strength. "They're coming back," Ethan said softly. "We need a plan." Sereth nodded. "We know the valley. We know its rocks and tunnels. They do not." Lyra flapped her wings excitedly. "We can hide, Mama, and fight if they try to come close." Sereth lowered her head. "Clever little one. But strategy must be more than hiding. We must prepare traps, scout the sky, and be ready to move fast." Ethan walked to the wreckage of the Nomad's Grace and began searching through the debris. He salvaged what he could: broken panels, loose wires, and old power cells. With his hands, he patched together a small energy flare launcher. If the syndicate came near, it could signal them blind sensors or create a distraction. "Not perfect," he muttered to himself, "but it might save us." Sereth watched him silently. "You work quickly. Humans still have some value." Ethan gave a faint smile. "Value isn't about species. It's about choices." They spent the day preparing. Ethan built small traps, mechanical snares that could topple drones or cause confusion. Lyra learned quickly, mimicking his movements, her claws adjusting wires and levers under his careful guidance. Sereth observed, moving silently through the cave's tunnels, memorizing paths and escape routes. Together, they became a small unit, a fragile alliance born of necessity. By mid-afternoon, the wind picked up. Clouds gathered overhead, dark and heavy. Sereth felt it in her bones. A storm was coming, both from nature and from beyond the sky. Ethan climbed to a higher ridge to scan the horizon. He spotted faint glints far away, the shadow of syndicate ships approaching. He hurried back down, alerting Sereth and Lyra. "They are closer than I thought," he said, panting. "We have hours, maybe less." Sereth nodded, her eyes scanning the rocks. "Then we prepare for war." Night fell quickly, shadows swallowing the valley. The three of them moved quietly through the tunnels, placing traps and marking escape routes. Lyra carried small lanterns that flickered faintly, illuminating their work without drawing attention. Every step was careful, measured, like a dance with death. Finally, they reached the cave's main chamber, the heart of their refuge. Ethan set up the flare launcher at the entrance. "If they come close, this will buy us some time." Lyra looked up at him with wide eyes. "Will it hurt them?" Only enough to confuse them, he said. We don't want unnecessary bloodshed. Sereth lowered her head. Mercy is a strength, not weakness. The wind howled through the tunnels, carrying the distant roar of engines. Shadows moved on the horizon. Ethan and Sereth exchanged a look. The time had come. From the cave's mouth, the valley appeared calm, but they knew the syndicate would breach it soon. Ethan loaded the flare launcher, checked the traps, and felt the pulse of fear and adrenaline. Lyra perched on a small rock beside him. We can do this, right? She asked softly. Ethan placed a hand on her small shoulder. We have to. Together. Sereth stretched her wings, their golden tips catching the moonlight. Together, she echoed. Far in the distance, the first lights of the approaching syndicate ships glimmered. The quiet of the valley shattered as the engines drew closer. The night was filled with tension, the air thick with smoke and anticipation. Ethan took a deep breath and aimed the flare launcher toward the sky. Sereth spread her wings, and Lyra crouched, ready to move. For the first time in weeks, the valley was alive. Not with fire, but with hope and defiance. And as the syndicate drew near, the dragon and human alliance waited, ready to prove that even in ashes, courage could rise. The first light of dawn spread slowly across the valley, casting soft gold and pink over the scarred landscape. The fires from the previous nights had burned low, leaving only faint smoke rising from the ruins. The air was thick with the scent of ash and metal, but beneath it all, there was a faint hint of new life. Ethan stood near the cave entrance, his body sore but steady. Sereth hovered above, wings partially open, scanning the horizon. Lyra was perched on a rock beside him, her small form shining in the morning light. The valley was quiet for now, but everyone knew it was only a pause. We survived, Ethan said quietly, breaking the silence. He flexed his stiff arms, glancing at the broken valley. For now. Sereth landed beside him, her golden eyes thoughtful. The syndicate will not give up so easily. They may return, stronger and more prepared. Lyra flapped her wings excitedly. Then we will be ready. Right, Mama? Sereth lowered her head and nodded. Yes, we fight together. But not just for survival. This valley, these people are kind, and even humans like Ethan, we fight for hope. Ethan smiled faintly. Hope isn't easy, but it's worth it. They spent the morning clearing the cave and preparing the area. Ethan salvaged what he could from the wreckage to build better traps and defenses. Sereth and Lyra scouted nearby cliffs and tunnels, mapping escape routes and safe zones. Together, they moved with purpose, a small but determined alliance. By midday, distant shapes appeared on the horizon. Syndicate ships were approaching, but they seemed cautious, wary after the explosions and chaos from previous encounters. Ethan and Sereth exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between them. This time they would be ready. The first drones appeared, hovering low over the valley. Ethan activated the flare launcher, sending brilliant bursts of light into the sky. The drones twisted and turned, sensors overloaded. Traps set along the cliffs triggered, sending rocks and debris crashing into the path of advancing drones. Sereth roared, a sound that echoed through the valley, powerful and commanding. Lyra joined, small but fierce, her golden scales shimmering as she leapt and twisted through the air. The drones struggled against the unexpected assault, their formations broken. Ethan maneuvered through the valley, guiding the drones toward the traps, using quick thinking and clever tactics. He laughed despite the tension. Not so clever now, are you? He muttered at the approaching machines. Hours passed, and the battle turned in favor of the dragons and their human ally. The syndicate was forced to retreat, leaving damaged drones and wrecked vehicles behind. The valley, though scarred and smoky, remained theirs. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, Ethan, Sereth, and Lyra stood together on a ridge overlooking the valley. The wind carried a faint freshness, the promise of renewal. Ethan looked at the dragons, and they looked back at him. A bond had formed through fire, ash, and battle, uniting them in a way that words could hardly express. We did it, Lyra whispered, her small wings quivering with excitement. We really did it. Seraph lowered her head and nuzzled the little dragon gently. Yes, little one. And this is only the beginning. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the cool wind on his face. He looked toward the distant mountains, where sunlight touched the peaks. Then let's make sure there are many beginnings to come. For the first time since the valley had burned, there was a sense of peace, fragile but real. The scars remained, a reminder of battles fought and hardships endured. Yet, within them, hope had been forged stronger than fire. The trio turned toward the valley, their eyes filled with determination. Together, they would rebuild, defend, and protect what remained. Together, they would show that even in a galaxy scarred by war and betrayal, courage, loyalty, and the bond between dragon and human could ignite a new dawn. As the sun rose higher, its light touched the valley fully, revealing not just the damage but also the promise of life. For Ethan, Seraph, and Lyra, the valley was no longer just a place of survival. It was a beginning, and the start of a story that the galaxy would not soon forget.